Welcome learners, my name is Mr. Njogu. Today we'll be looking at tongue twisters, and hope when you're still at home you're still keeping safe and making sure that you're following the government directives, and we are hoping to see you soon when you go back to school. So last time I was here we were looking at something we call the fables, which is one of the sub-genres of the oral literature. So today I want us to look at Form 2 work, and today we shall be looking at something called the tongue twisters, and when we talk about tongue twisters, it is also one of the sub-genres of the oral literature, but it's normally tackled in Form 2. So when you talk about tongue twisters, maybe this is not a new term to you, so you should ask yourself, what is this we are calling a tongue twister? And a tongue twister is a phrase or a sentence, that is hard to speak fast because of alliteration or because of a sequence of similar sounds. For example, how do you talk about a sequence of similar sounds? So you find that when you're talking of a tongue twister, you'll find that there's a sequence. This sentence have a sequence of words which are similar that make it difficult for the person who is pronouncing or the person who is saying the tongue twister to be difficult to pronounce it. So we can also, it is also worth noting that when you talk about a tongue twister, you'll find that it is always alliterative. And we shall see what is the meaning of alliterative when we shall be looking at now the mnemonic features or the sound patterns of tongue twisters. You'll find where alliterative is now coming about. So when you talk about a tongue twister, maybe I can give you an example so that you can get to know what you are saying when you talk about a tongue twister. For example, here I have an example of a tongue twister. Let me give you an example so that you can get to know what you're talking about. I have an English tongue twister here. She sells. And also at home you can try to say this one. She sells seashells on the seashore. So she sells seashells on the sea. And the one thing about tongue twisters, you should say it as fast as you can so that you can see the sweetness of a tongue twister, because you can't say a tongue twister in a slow voice. You say it faster so that you can now get the sweetness of a tongue twister. She sells seashells on the seashore. You find that when you are maybe saying it at home, you'll find that most of you might be saying, instead of saying seashells, you find some of you will make mistakes and start saying she shells. You see, you make a mistake. And that's the sweetness of our tongue twister. When you start now confusing yourself, instead of saying a sea, you find yourself now you're saying a shell instead of a sea. For example, she sells seashells on the sea. Sure. For example, we also have another example of a tongue twister. Any noise. Any noise. A noise. Noise, a noise, an oyster, but noisy. Any noise, a noise, an oyster, but noisy noise, noise. A noise, an oyster more. A noise, an oyster more. So any noise, a noise, an oyster, but any noise, a noise, an oyster more. Can you say it also? That any noise, an oyster, but noisy noise, a noise, an oyster more. Can you get to hear of a tongue twister? You see, you see it is more alliterative. Maybe you're asking yourself, what is this you are calling alliterative? We shall look at it when we'll be looking at now the features or the sound patterns or the mnemonic features of a tongue twister. Here also we can give a third example, that kindly kittens, and hope you are trying to say these ones at home and you see whether you say it correctly, or maybe you have some problems when it comes to pronunciation, because the major factor, or why we are talking about tongue twisters, is to see whether you are able to pronounce these words correctly. So kindly, kittens, knighting, mittens, keep kazooing, in the king's kitchen. In the king's kitchen. Also say this one. Kindly kittens, knighting, mittens, keep kazooing in the king's kitchen. Also try to say that one so that you can see now the factor of what we are talking about being alliterative. Repetition. We shall see how the repetition of these sounds, where they are coming about when you talk about alliteration. So maybe you're asking yourself, when you are giving all these examples, why is the key factor where we are talking about all these examples of tongue twisters, and where is now this alliterative coming about? So let us look at about the mnemonic features. Mnemonic features of tongue twisters. And another word which means mnemonic, and the M is silent. It is not mnemonic, it's mnemonic. M is silent. You should know that one. Or you should note that one, that M is silent, because you might be brought a question and you are told to identify a silent letter in the word mnemonic. So M is silent. We don't say mnemonic, but we say mnemonic. So when you talk about the mnemonic features, they are also called the sound patterns. Sound patterns or sound devices. Sound devices. So let's look at now the sound devices, or the mnemonic features, or the sound patterns which are found now in the tongue twisters. And we have case examples of our tongue twisters, and we shall give as many tongue twisters as we continue. We shall also even give tongue twisters in our mother language, or L1 language, in your mother tongue. I'll give an example of a mother tongue tongue twister as we continue. So let us look at the first feature of a mnemonic, or the first mnemonic feature of a tongue twister. And the first one is what we are calling now alliteration. Alliteration. So what is alliteration? Maybe you might ask yourself, how is this alliterative coming about in these tongue twisters? So what is alliteration? So when you talk about alliteration, is now the repetition of initial sounds or initial consonantal sounds in the beginning of a word. You find that a repetition of initial consonantal sounds in the beginning of nearby words. Not just any word, but words which are nearby. Maybe a repetition. So we talk about repetition. Repetition of initial consonantal sounds in the nearby words. So you might also ask yourself, what is a consonant? And when you talk about a consonant, it's worth noting that we normally have consonants and vowels. So when you talk about the vowels, is a, e, o, u. These are what we call the vowels. Others, except the a, e, and u, are what you call the consonants. Maybe you can talk of pa, ba, ma. Now all these are examples of consonants, except a, e, o, u. Those are the vowel sounds. And it is also worth noting that when you talk about a consonantal sound, we are not talking of these are consonants. But when you are saying a sound, or when you are writing a sound, you don't, like, for example, if it's sound P, we don't write a sound like a letter. You must differentiate between a sound and a letter. And a sound is normally written using the slashes. This is how you write a sound. So that one should be noted, that when you are writing a sound, you don't write a letter, because this is an alphabet. But when you talk about now a sound, so that it can be seen as a sound, you must make sure that you are putting the slashes. Are we together? So now let us see what you are talking about now, the repetition of these initial sounds in the nearby words. Let's go back to our examples of the tongue twister. She sells seashells on the seashore. So where do you see repetition of these initial consonantal sounds? And consonantal sounds, we have said, examples, pa, ba, man, all those except a, e, o, u in the alphabet. So let's see where the alliteration in our case example is coming about. For example, she sells seashells. Maybe here you can talk of, maybe someone can tell me that we have these ones. But these two are not the same. This is sound sa and this is sound shwa. There's a difference. Yes, you might tell me these are repetition of this consonant. But remember, you're not just talking about consonants. We are talking of consonantal sound. This sound is different with this sound. Maybe you can ask me, how is it different? You see, when you are writing the word she, phonetically, maybe you have been taught how to write words phonetically. This one will appear as S. But this one will appear as a schwa. It's called a schwa sound. That's why when you are pronouncing, you are not saying cells. You are not saying that she. You are not saying this one as C, but you are saying as she. So the S here is the schwa sound, but the S here is the sa sound. So she sells seashells on the seashore. So maybe where alliteration here is coming about is the one like she and shell. Because now this is what sound shwa, and sound shwa is written as shwa, and this is sound shwa. Maybe also alliteration can come about because of cell and C. Because this one is sound sa, the S sound. This one is shwa, but this one is sa. This is shwa and this is sa. So alliteration in our case example of the she sells seashells on the seashore is because of repetition of the sound shwa in she and C. She and shells, and also repetition of the word sa or the sound sa because of cells and C. Also, we can get to the third example of a tongue twister. Kindly, kittens, knitting. We have the sound ka. Can you see repetition of the sound ka in kindly, in kittens, and in knitting? So there's not in knitting, sorry. It is kindly and kittens because the sound here k is silent. You don't say kiting, it's knitting. Are you together? So we have repetition of the sound k in kindly and in kittens. So that when you talk about alliteration, it's all about the repetition of initial consonantal sounds in the nearby words. Are we together? The second sound pattern or the second mnemonic feature is something that we call the consonants. The consonants. And it is also good to note that when you talk about these mnemonic features or these sound patterns, you shall also see them when you talk about poems. Maybe our next lesson we might look at poems and we shall see all these things that we are talking about. They will also appear in poems. So when you talk about consonants, so what is a consonant? A consonant is the repetition of the inner consonant sound in the nearby words. Remember here, this is the opposite of this one. That we said in alliteration, it is the repetition of initial consonantal sounds. So this one is initial. And in consonants, we have said it is in the inner. Not in the initial, but inside. Inside now our tongue twister, we shall find that there is repetition of these consonants. It is not consonant. Consonant is also its consonants. Consonants, sorry. So when we talk about consonants, it's repetition of still the consonantal sounds, but now it is not in the beginning. We are not talking now at the beginning. It is inside. Maybe for example, we can have in our example, kittens and knitting. We see we have the T. It is inside. But for alliteration, it should be there in the beginning. Are we together? It should be in the beginning. So here, for example, we can give an example of consonants in our third example. Kindly, kittens, knitting, because of T. Sound T. The ta sound or the T sound is repeated in the first, in the second word, and in the third word. Remember, it is in the inner part. It is not in the beginning. Are we together? The third mnemonic feature that we are going to look at is something that we call the assonance. The assonance. The assonance. Maybe you can ask yourself, Lana, what is an assonance? So when you talk about an assonance, is now the repetition of vowel sounds in the nearby words. Remember that we said alliteration is repetition of initial consonantal sounds. We have talked about consonants when you are talking about consonants and alliteration. So assonance is now when you are talking about the vowels. You see that the vowels will be repeated when you'll be talking about the assonance. But when you're talking about the alliteration and consonants, is where you have the repetition of consonantal sounds. But when you talk about the assonance, is the repetition of now the repetition of these vowels, the vowels. And which are these vowels that we have talked about? A, E, O, U. So these are repetition of vowels. Let's maybe give you an example of a good tongue twister here that has a repetition of these vowel sounds. We have this tongue twister here. How much would, not this wood, it's the wood of, how much would, could, a wood chopper, how much would a wood chopper chop, if a wood chopper could chop wood, So these are a good example of a tongue twister also. So when you're talking about this tongue twister, we want to see where now our assonance is coming about. Remember, assonance is the repetition of the vowels. And which are the vowels? A, E, O, U. And it's not just the vowels, sorry. It's the vowel sounds. Don't forget, it's not just the vowels, but the vowel sounds. Let's look at our example here. Where do we have repetition? We can see the repetition of the word U, U, U. It's not O, it's U. Even when you are writing it phonetically, this is not O. It is not sound O. That one you should note. This one, when you say repetition of the U, it's written as, and it's the long vowel U. When you want to mean a long vowel, when we are talking about phonetics, or when we are looking at writing words phonetically, we have to see that U will not appear as U. It is not O. We don't have a sound O. It's U. And it's the U, the long vowel. So you have repetition of the U in would, could, would. We have repetition of, and remember those words should be nearby each other. That is a key factor to note. That when we're talking about alliteration, consonants, assonance, those words should be near each other. So we have the long vowel U, which is repeated in would and could. Are we together? So you say that alliteration is coming about because of repetition of the sound U. And it is the sound, not the vowel. The fourth mnemonic feature, which is the last, they are normally form, most cases. And you'll also find them in poems. They appear very clearly in poems and also in tongue twisters. We have something we call, the fourth one is what now we are calling, the last feature is the repetition. Repetition. Repetition is now the repeater. You'll see words are repeated. For example, in this example that I have given, we have repetition of wood. Wood. You see, wood is repeated severally. Also, chopper. Chopper is repeated here. You also repeated also here. So there's repetition, which will always be found when we are talking about now these mnemonic features that you shall see repetition in tongue twisters. Words are repeated severally so that you can see now where these things are all coming about. So these are now the mnemonic features or the sound patterns or the sound devices of tongue twisters. Let's continue. Remember, we are still in tongue twisters. Let's now see the features of tongue twister. What makes something to be a tongue twister? These are the sound features. Now see the normal features, or how you can say features is also the same as a characteristic. How are you able to tell that this is a tongue twister? So the features of tongue twisters. Features of tongue twister. Remember, you can continue asking questions through the platforms in your screen there. Ask as many questions, and I will be very willing to give an answer to those questions. So we now want to talk about now the features. Those were the mnemonic features. Now the features. They are just two features of tongue twisters. And one of the main features you'll find is that, or the characteristic of a tongue twister, it is not long. It is a short. It is short and brief. Short and brief. A tongue twister is normally short and brief. They are not long. You can see all those examples that we have given here. They are normally very short. They are not long. They are very short tongue twisters. They are not that long. They are very short. So that at least you can able to pronounce it. The second thing that you will also find is they are alliterative. Remember when I was introducing what a tongue twister is, I talked about alliterative. They are always alliterative. So they are alliterative. And I hope you don't have a problem when it comes to alliteration. I've told you what alliteration is, and you have a question on that, I'll be so willing to give you an answer to that. So they are alliterative. So these are the main features, that they are normally short and brief, and also they are normally alliterative. Another thing, maybe you can talk about the functions. Why do you have to learn about these tongue twisters? Which is their functions, or what are the functions of these tongue twisters? Functions, eh? Remember, as I finish all this, I want to give you more examples of tongue twisters, maybe in the L1 language or in your mother tongue language. And also at home, you can try to be creative enough and come up with your own tongue twister and try to see how these sound patterns are coming about. So the functions of these tongue twisters. And one of the function, or one of the important thing about these tongue twisters, they entertain. They entertain. So when you are saying these tongue twisters and you make a mistake, maybe your colleague will see the fun of it. Maybe I can give you an example here of a tongue twister in the L1 language as I'm talking about. So I have this tongue twister, and you can tell me where this tongue twister is from. Remember, when we are learning literature, or when you are looking at literature, you are always allowed even to give maybe a tongue twister in your own language. As long as you can give a translation, we give a mark to that. Maybe you are given in an exam, you are told to give a tongue twister, right? Or you are told maybe to identify or to bring up a tongue twister of your own language and also try to interpret that tongue twister. So I have a tongue twister here in Kikuyu. It's a Kikuyu tongue twister. Also try to be creative enough. Give your own tongue twister in your L1 language. As long as you can give a translation to that tongue twister, you always give a mark to that. We have this tongue twister. Most people know it. Try to say it as I write it down. You see, when you are writing Kikuyu, you must be very keen so that you don't write your own things. Try to say it as I write it down. Maybe I'll start by saying it so that you can also try to say it. It is kanaka ni kora kona kora kora. Nako kanaka ni kora kona kani kora kora. Try to say it. Maybe I can give a translation so that you can get to see what's the meaning of this. When you talk about this, it's a translation. This is a Kikuyu tongue twister. A Kikuyu tongue twister. This is a translation. The English version. It is a Nicola's child. Nicola's child. So a little frog. So a little frog. Hide. So a little frog hide. When the little frog saw Nicola's child, and the little frog saw Nicola's child hide, the little frog hid. So it's a translation of this one, that Nicola's child saw a little frog hide. When the frog saw Nicola's child hide, the little frog hid. So you'll also find that when you interpret this one, or when you give now the version of this, it is no longer a tongue twister. This is not a tongue twister. It is going to lose the aesthetic value or the beauty of now the tongue twister. But when you say it in the L1 language, it will make it more sweet, or it will make it more interesting, because you'll find most Kikuyus, instead of putting the R, they'll put an L. Others, you see in most Kikuyu words, they don't normally have L. Every word is R, R. That's why you find most people will have this problem with the accent. Instead of saying R, or instead maybe saying L, where you're supposed to say R, you'll always put R in all instances. So when you are saying this tongue twister, it is going to help you maybe to evade, or now the issue of the accent. It is going to help you now to be more good when it comes to maybe pronunciation of words. So they will always entertain, because when you are saying these tongue twisters, maybe in your L1 language, it is maybe a way of, it is also, earlier maybe this was a game, maybe you could have put it in the category, maybe the kids are playing together, they will say tongue twisters, so it's a way of entertaining people. Another thing when you talk about now the functions of tongue twisters is that they teach pronunciation. They teach pronunciation. You see, remember when we were talking about the mnemonic features, you are able now to see how alliteration is coming about, how the assonance is coming about. So when you see these differences, you are able now to get the difference between va and fa, sa and shwa. Remember, it's a shwa sound, like in the word show, shell, she. All these words, that's where we have the shwa sound. Maybe I can write it here so that you can see. The shwa sound that I was talking about are examples of words like show, shell, she, the shwa sound. So you're able to see the differences between sa, the sa sound, and the shwa sound. Sa, for example, the word like see, cell, are good examples of the sound sa, but shwa are examples of show, shell, and she. So you can see there is a difference when you are pronouncing these two. So when you have, or you start saying more, you come up with your own tongue twisters, you are able now to learn the problem of pronunciation. It will not be an issue to you. So you'll become good when it comes to pronunciation. And the last function of the tongue twister, they enhance creativity. You become more creative when you start saying this, or maybe you come up with your own tongue twister. You become more creative. So it will enhance creativity. Enhance creativity. It will enhance creativity. Remember, when you come up with your own tongue twister, you become more creative. That when it comes maybe to when you are writing a composition, or when you are writing maybe an essay, you are able maybe to come up with your own words. Remember, you become more creative enough to come up with your own article. So these are some of the things that are normally found in tongue twisters. Those are the functions. Remember, we have talked about the sound patterns. We have given more examples of these tongue twisters. And at home, try to get more examples of these tongue twisters. So I want to maybe see some of the questions that you have asked so that I can see the way forward. I have so many questions here. I'll answer some of them. So, Godi, what are the importance of tongue twisters? I've said these are functions. How are they important? They will help us, or they will entertain. You'll also learn, or they will teach you in terms of pronunciation. It is also going to enhance now this creativity. Those are the importances, or why we have to talk about these tongue twisters. Peter from Pipeline picked a piece of Thanks for today's lesson. Nihilda from Kaptagat Girls, Form 4. Great lesson, Teacher Njogu. I'm enjoying the lesson. Thank you so much. This is Emmanuel from Kisumu. What about those with some consonant sound that appear at the end of the word? Which sound feature do we give them? Is it consonants? Yeah, remember that consonants, when we talked about the consonants, we said the alliteration comes in the beginning. It is at the beginning, eh? Or the initial. But when you talk about now the consonants, the inner, when you talk about the inner, it might come at the end, at the middle. As long as it's not in the beginning, we refer it as consonants. Are you together? Hope your question is answered. As long as it's not appearing in the initial or in the beginning of that word, remember, the rest is just going to be assonance. As long as it's a repetition of consonantal sounds and it is not in the beginning, it is going to be referred as a consonance. As I wind up, there's also a question. Maybe my producer can try to reflect that question in your screen so that you can try to look at it at home. And also be creative enough. Try to come up with your own tongue twister at home and make sure that you are able to identify these sound patterns, these sound features, and try to see now the importance or the beauty of these tongue twisters. Maybe thank you so much for that lesson, and maybe next time we shall look at poems so that you can try to see how these sound patterns or how these mnemonic features will also appear in the poem. So make sure you try to come up with your own tongue twister and find or try to see how these mnemonic features are going to appear. Thank you so much and have a lovely day.